Hey everyone! ChatGP Taylor aka Taylor here. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we will be continuing the What If series, where I go over some hypothetical scenarios from Disventure Camp that could have taken place if one critical event was changed. Last time, we took a look at what would have happened if there wasn't a two-team elimination ceremony in episode 9 of season 3. Today's video will look at something different. If there are any specific what-if scenarios that you would like to see me play out in the future, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And with that, let's get started. Before I begin, make sure to like and subscribe if this video is to your liking, and make sure to comment down below if there's anything that you would like to see going forward. Much like last time, the topic for today's video is something that I've had in my video idea spreadsheet for a while, and to be honest, I can't remember if someone suggested this or not. I'm really sorry if someone did and I just don't remember. But here it is. The idea for today's video is, what if Riya swapped Hunter to the orange team in episode 4 of season 2? As a refresher, in episode 4 of season 2, Riya found an advantage that allowed her to swap one member of her team for one member of the other team. With this power, Riya decided to send Yul, her biggest enemy, to the orange team, in exchange for Rosa, who ended up becoming her closest ally. We know what happened next. Riya established herself as the twist villain of the season, and James ended up winning the $1 million prize. But what would have happened if Riya swapped Hunter to the other team instead of Yul? After all, swapping Hunter would ensure that the Poly Trio does not have complete control of the green team, and it opens the door for Riya to possibly convince Tess and Ali to help her vote out Yul. Well, let's find out. Well, the first thing that we need to look at is the episode 4 challenge, since the swap happens before the challenge. And since Crystal's final question was about Aiden, and not Hunter or Rosa, then Hunter and Rosa switching teams shouldn't change the outcome of the challenge, meaning that the orange team still loses. But who gets voted out? Well, I think Maggie and Lake voted for James, because even though they didn't vote for James in canon, I suspect that it was because they hated Yul more than James, and not because Yul was the new guy on the team. As for James, I think he votes for Maggie since that's what he did in canon, and he would successfully convince Hunter to join him, offering himself as a new ally that Hunter will need now that he's separated from his original team. This leaves Aiden as the swing vote. Now, this is where I want to take some creative liberty. In my last What If video, I tried to incorporate more of a story element in order to add more depth to the season, while making sure that what happens in the season can still reasonably happen. So, I'm going to do the same thing here. From my understanding, this episode is extremely controversial, and most of it is due to the fact that Crystal pretty much outed that someone in the cast is transgender. The community is right to be upset about this, and I think the fact that there wasn't anyone in the show who called out Crystal for outing someone makes this episode even worse. I would imagine that if this episode were written now, Aiden would be at least a little shaken up by what Crystal did, since that statement referred to him. So for this timeline, Aiden is going to be shaken up after the challenge, as he grapples with how he should move forward after what Crystal said during the challenge. While he does this, James walks up to Aiden and tries to recruit him into voting for Maggie. Aiden would politely ask James to leave him alone, saying that he doesn't want to be bothered. James, not knowing what Aiden is going through, would insist on talking, noting that they don't have a lot of time left until the ceremony, and that they need to work together in order to survive. Aiden would again insist that he wants to be alone right now, which prompts James to bring up that his followers won't be happy if he gives up. This line is what sets Aiden off and causes him to yell at James. Keep in mind that by this point, Aiden is at a very unsteady point in the game right now, and after spending the past 2 episodes bottling up his frustration towards James, this is where he lets it out. Aiden would lash out at James, telling him that he doesn't care about what the followers think and especially not what James thinks about him. This declaration is even more impactful when we know that Aiden was rejected from season 1 since the casting directors thought he was uninteresting, and that he dyed his hair to appeal to them. So, by Aiden declaring that he doesn't care about what James and his followers think of him, not only is he putting James in his place, but he's also standing up for himself and declaring that he's not going to let others' opinions influence him. This advances the story while also allowing Aiden's character to grow and progress based on the backstory that he was given going into the show, which is something that I feel would be beneficial for his character and help improve the audience's perception of him. And with that done, the episode ends with Aiden casting the deciding vote against James, sending him home by a vote of 3-2. James leaves upset, wondering where it all went wrong for him. But if you ask me, it went wrong the second that he threw Carol under the bus back in episode 2. Yes, I'm still bitter about that. We'll kick off episode 5 by starting with the same scene as in canon, with Aiden and Lake having a conversation about themselves. Aiden would encourage Lake to talk things over with Rosa about what she said regarding Lake's life, just like in canon. But additionally, I think Aiden would talk about his own situation and admit that he feels much better after putting James in his place and asserting himself as his own person. This admission would make Lake start thinking about being her own person, while also bringing Lake and Aiden closer as a duo, setting the stage for both of their futures in this season. While this takes place, Hunter would try to approach Maggie and talk strategy, perhaps with Hunter proposing an alliance to counter the potential alliance of Lake and Aiden. The goal of this conversation would be to highlight Hunter's status as someone who is strategy-oriented, which should help with his characterization. That being said, Maggie would be highly resistant to Hunter's attempts, noting that Hunter voted for her at the last ceremony. This would confuse Hunter, and he would probably admit in a confessional that it's weird how Maggie isn't thinking about the future, and only about how she feels in the moment, further cementing Hunter's status as a strategic thinker. And finally, I want to include a new scene involving Yul, Tess, and Ali. With Hunter gone from their team, Yul would try and step up as the leader of their alliance. However, because of Yul's attitude, he would try and order Tess and Ali around in an extremely demeaning way, thus annoying Tess and Ali and causing them to want to talk to Hunter for advice on how to handle Yul. And with that, we head to the section of the episode where the campers get to search for the immunity totem. In general, most of the canon interactions should still take place, and Rosa should still find the totem, just like she did in canon. However, the one thing that I want to talk about is the conversation between Hunter, Tess, and Ali. In canon, Tess and Ali wanted to talk about their relationship with Hunter. But in this timeline, Tess and Ali would want to talk about how to handle Yul's attitude. However, Hunter would still brush them off, telling them that he needs to focus on finding the totem because he's alone on his team. This would be another example of how Hunter is neglecting the social aspect of the game in favor of the strategic side of the game, which only further alienates Tess and Ali in this game. This would make Tess and Ali consider branching out and talking to other members of their team, such as Riya. Next, we get to the challenge. As I've established in previous episodes of this series, since the Orange team canonically lost due to Lake not doing her dare, the Orange team should still lose this challenge in this timeline. However, I do want to add one moment to this challenge for the sake of story building. In canon, Aiden encouraged Lake to not follow through with Crystal's dare since it didn't matter if they won the challenge or not. But in this timeline, since Crystal outed that someone was transgender in the previous episode, and since Aiden would remember Crystal doing this, Aiden would strongly encourage Lake to not only refuse the dare, but to stand up for herself and not let Crystal control her, mirroring how Aiden wants to stand up for himself against production and their thoughts of him. And of course, Lake stands up for herself, calls out Crystal for being a monster, and Crystal ends the challenge with the Orange team losing. As for the elimination ceremony, I'm not going to waste too much time on it, because it's quite obvious. While Hunter probably votes for Maggie due to her refusal to work with him, the other three campers band together and take out Hunter for being the new guy on their team, sending him away confused as to how his strategic mindset failed him. Let's start this episode by going through the pre-challenge events. Now, the most notable pre-challenge event was Hunter, Ali, and Tess waking up in the same bed. However, because Hunter is gone, this can't happen. So, I'm just going to include a scene with Lake and Aiden, where Lake thanks Aiden for giving her the push that she needed to stand up to Crystal in the previous episode. And while the two of them bond, we can include a scene where Maggie is visibly concerned, and she can admit in a confessional that she's worried about Lake getting close with Aiden. Maggie has admitted previously that people tend to avoid her, so seeing Lake getting close to Aiden might make Maggie more paranoid that Lake might choose Aiden over her. And with that, we get to the challenge. With James and Hunter gone, we'll need to change up a few of the pairings. And for the sake of the story, here's how I see it playing out. We'll start by pairing up Maggie and Rosa. This would allow Maggie to express her concern over Lake's interactions with Aiden, while Rosa would dissuade Maggie from being worried, assuring Maggie that Lake would stay loyal to them. Next, we'll pair up Yul with Riya. Now, I'm sure we all know that Yul and Riya canonically haven't treated each other the best. That being said, since Riya didn't swap Yul over to the Orange team in this timeline, I'm cautiously considering the possibility of Yul trying to persuade Riya into joining his alliance. Especially now that Hunter is gone, Yul needs to recruit someone in order to almost have a majority. And with Connor gone, Yul could surmise that Riya is alone and probably needs an ally, and would thus join up with him and his alliance. At this point, I feel like Riya would awkwardly say yes, but in a confessional, she would specify that she's unsure of who she should stick with between Yul and Rosa. After all, Riya's loyalty to Rosa was canonically solidified when Riya and Rosa talked in the forest during episode 6. But since that conversation doesn't happen in this episode, Riya has at least some reason to consider siding with Yul, even though she's definitely hesitant to do so. For the third pairing, I'll put together Lake and Aiden. The two of them will start the challenge by bonding, but when Crystal takes Lake away, just like in canon, this will give Aiden the opportunity to be more self-reliant and start caring for himself. While he would be a little worried about being alone, he now sees this as an obstacle that he needs to overcome, rather than something that he needs to dread. The key point is to show how Aiden is becoming more self-confident and more focused on who he is and what he can do, rather than what others think he can do, which is important. And the final pairing is the only one that remains the same from canon, which is Tess and Ali. But this is where I want to add some minor changes for the sake of the story. Now, The moment between them that I think is the most memorable from this episode is when Tess breaks down in the cave and Ali tries to help her. That being said, from what I've seen in the community, the reception regarding Odd Nation Cartoons' portrayal of Tess's depression is mixed. Now, I'm not qualified to say whether the portrayal is good or not, so all I can do is say what I would do to add to the story. And in this scene, I think I want this scene to be a culmination of Tess's built-up feelings. With Hunter gone from the game, Tess would feel even more alone than she did before. And considering that Tess grew up as an orphan, it's very possible that Hunter's elimination could further compound Tess's feeling that she has no one, causing her to break down like she did in canon. If Tess expresses this feeling in reference to her backstory, this is when Ali would step in to try and assure Tess that she's here for her and that she will never abandon her. With these events, this could potentially add a bit of depth into Tess's feelings while also showing the bond between Tess and Ali, which is more important than ever considering that Hunter is now gone. And with that, this episode pretty much ends the same way as in canon, with Lake and Crystal bonding, Crystal allowing Lake to stay on the show. Lake declares that she won't let her parents control her life, and with no one being voted out. And when Tess and Ali have their brief conversation before joining the others in the hot tub, Tess thanks Ali for being there for her, promises to stick by her side, and the two embrace, further solidifying their bond. Let's start this episode with a canon scene, and that's the scene where Rosa, Riya, and Lake sneak into Crystal's tent to get Riya's perfume and Lake's new wig. And since Aiden and Maggie are here in this universe and are also close with Rosa and Lake, I don't think it's a far stretch to include them in this scene too. While Lake would still be encouraged to embrace her new wig, this scene would also allow Riya to grow closer to Lake, Maggie, and Aiden, further motivating her to side with this alliance going forward. Meanwhile, Yul would once again lecture Tess and Ali about how they can gain the majority, noting that their best chance is to keep Riya on their side while swaying Aiden over to their side by pointing out the close bond between Maggie, Lake, and Rosa. And while Tess and Ali would agree with Yul, they would both agree in their respective confessionals that Yul is extremely overbearing, and they question whether it's better to try and make moves without Yul dragging them down. Now for the challenge. With Hunter and James gone, Maggie and Yul take their places on the first team. Now canonically, Hunter did take out Rosa. So with Hunter gone, are either Maggie or Yul able to take out Rosa? I don't think Maggie would want to, since Rosa is her friend. But considering Yul's blatant racism towards Rosa during this season, I don't think he'll have any reservations towards hurting Rosa, so I think he'll definitely try and take Rosa out. But even if he's unable to hit her, Team 1 should still win part 1 of the challenge, since they would have 4 members to the other team's 2 members. Since Tess canonically never knocked anyone off the platform, the only way that Team 2 could win is if Rosa knocks off 3 people from the other team, and I think it's unlikely that it will happen. So, Team 1 still wins part 1 of the challenge. Now we're on to part 2. Since James was eliminated where Maggie was originally eliminated, and because Hunter was eliminated where Yul was originally eliminated, we'll have Maggie take James's place to face Riya while Yul takes Hunter's place to face Lake in the challenge. So who wins each matchup? Well, I think Lake easily beats Yul. Yul would be overconfident, and Lake's pent-up anger towards Yul would finally come out, allowing her to knock Yul off his platform. But what about Maggie versus Riya? Well, I've outlined this scenario in previous videos, so I'll just keep it the same. With Maggie's large size and the canonical instability of the pedestals, I think Maggie's pedestal falls over, and Maggie falls with it, eliminating her from the challenge, thereby sending Riya to compete in part 3 against Lake. And between the two of them, because Lake canonically came really close to winning this challenge, there would need to be overwhelming evidence to make me believe that Riya would beat Lake, and I don't think there is overwhelming evidence for that. So, I think Lake wins immunity in this spot. But who gets voted out? Well, I think he launches a campaign against Maggie, because according to episode 1, he canonically sees her as a physical threat. By extension, I think Tess and Ali join him, although it's out of necessity, rather than desire. On the flip side, I think the friendship trio stays together and votes for Yul, fueled by their mutual hatred of him. This leaves Riya and Aiden as the swing votes. The friendship trio keeps their faith in them, believing that they will remain loyal. Meanwhile, the original Green Team members pitch to Riya and Aiden that they need to band together to prevent the friendship trio from gaining the majority. Tess and Ali would point out that Riya started out on the Green Team, while Yul would point out that with him gone, Aiden would be the only male left, which may not be favorable to him. Although Riya and Aiden would consider both offers, I think they ultimately stay loyal and vote for Yul, sending him home by a vote of 5-3. Yul then leaves frustrated, and he probably curses out everyone else as he leaves. This episode canonically had 2 pre-challenge scenes, so we'll stick with that. The scene where Hunter and Ali talk about what to do next will be replaced by a scene with Tess and Ali. The topic of conversation would remain the same, with both of them declaring that they will go with each other to the final 2, and that they need to find a way to flip Riya and Aiden to their side. In her confessional, Ali would declare that she can't afford to sit around anymore, and that she needs to step up and take charge. Or as she would say, she needs to stop being an NPC and grab a hold of my controller. It makes sense for the gamer girl. Similarly, Tess would have a confessional where she declares that she needs to open up and trust Ally, since she doesn't really have anyone else to turn to, and that she trusts Ally with all her heart. Meanwhile, the majority alliance of 5 would meet up, and Lake would talk about getting a tattoo, just like she talked about in canon. But this next part is where I'll take some creative liberty for the sake of storytelling. To start, Aiden will excuse himself to go to the bathroom, and with the knowledge that we know from Season 3, Aiden will walk pretty far away. While he's gone, this is where Rosa reveals to Maggie, Lake, and Riya that she has the immunity totem. The group would rejoice, but after one of them points out that Aiden isn't here to see this, Rosa suggests the possibility of not telling Aiden about it. Yes, I know that this is a bit deceitful and that's not exactly 100% in character for Rosa. But at the same time, she canonically made it clear that she wants to use her totem to get her alliance to the finale. And as much as she might like Aiden, he's really only in her alliance through his connection with Lake, so he's not as much of a priority to Rosa compared to Maggie, Lake, and Riya. So, I don't think this is too far-fetched. Nonetheless, the scene will still end the same way, with Riya wondering why Rosa didn't tell her about the totem until now, and this is when Riya will consider the possibility of flipping sides to take out either Maggie or Lake. This leads to the challenge. I'm just going to break this down piece by piece. I think Ally will go to the showers just like in canon, while Tess would go back to the cabin to wait for Ally. Meanwhile, I think Rosa and Lake head to the docks, just like in canon, but I'm actually going to have Maggie take Riya's place in this scene, and the 3 of them will have their usual conversations. This switch will allow Riya to pull Aiden away to a private area. For the sake of picking an area, let's pick the mess hall. This is where Riya, being paranoid over Rosa's actions, would tell Aiden about Rosa's totem, and pitch the idea of flipping on the alliance to take out Maggie or Lake. Aiden would be extremely hesitant, given his closeness to Lake, but he would agree to consider it. Unfortunately, since the killer canonically went to the mess hall first, and was canonically able to kill 2 people, I don't think it's a stretch to assume that the killer is able to take out Aiden and Riya first, just like they were able to do to Aiden and James in canon. This leads into the next section, where the killer takes out Ally in the showers, just like in canon. The remaining 4 campers, which are Lake, Maggie, Rosa, and Tess, show up at the showers shortly after. This is when Lake suggests going back to the cabins, hoping that James may have left his phone in his bed before he left, which is possible since it's not like James stopped to pack up his bags before leaving the camp. However, even though Maggie and Rosa probably follow Lake to the cabins, I think Tess stays in the bathroom with Ally, completely distraught over her friend's apparent death. Considering that Tess has made it clear to this point that Ally is the only person that she had left in the game, with Ally seemingly dead, I think that would completely break Tess. This period of sadness would leave Tess open to being taken out by the killer, which I think happens. From here, I think the canon events pretty much stay the same, with Maggie taking Riya's place. The killer follows the girls to the cabins. Maggie is taken out after helping Rosa and Lake through the window, Rosa is taken out after trying to face the killer head-on, and Lake is taken out after being chased by the killer on boats. This means that the killer, who is revealed to be Carol, is allowed to re-enter the game and also wins immunity for that ceremony. And along with this, Carol now has to pick 2 campers to give immunity to. I think this is a pretty clear decision. In canon, Nina encouraged Carol to save Hunter and Ally since that would force the majority alliance of 5 to vote out one of their own. So, I think Nina does something similar in this timeline by encouraging Carol to save Tess and Ally, since they are on the outs of the majority alliance. Carol would comply, meaning that Tess and Ally also win immunity. But who gets voted out? This is a bit tough. I can see Rosa targeting Aiden, since in this timeline, he's the person that she's the least close to. I think Maggie would join Rosa, having trust in Rosa's allegiances. However, Lake would be extremely conflicted due to her deep friendship with Aiden. And honestly, I just can't imagine Lake voting for Aiden, so I'll have her vote for Riya instead. Meanwhile, now that Tess and Ally are immune, this is where Riya jumps ship to take out Maggie, hoping that this will force Rosa to be more loyal to her going forward. I think she would try and pitch Tess and Ally to join her, and I think they do, since canonically, Ally was very open to working with Riya at this point in the game, so she probably does the same here. I think Aiden would join them in voting for Maggie, and he would probably be the big force in targeting Maggie over Lake, due to his existing friendship with Lake. And for Carol, even though she blames Aiden for her prior elimination, since Carol canonically held off on targeting Aiden for one more episode, I could see her siding with the majority to take out Maggie, with the hidden goal of taking out Aiden next time. So, this means that Maggie gets the majority of the votes by a vote of 5 to 2 to 1. And although I could imagine a universe where Rosa does play her totem on Maggie, I actually don't think that Rosa plays the totem. I think she has enough faith in Riya and Lake that she would feel comfortable enough to not play the totem, with the expectation that both of them would vote for Aiden. But because of this, Maggie is voted out, causing Lake and Rosa to apologize to her. However, Maggie would leave in good spirits, noting that after years of not having friends by her side, she's grateful that she finally has people that she can put her trust into, and that means more to her than the grand prize. And before she leaves, Maggie would thank Lake and Rosa for their friendship and promise to keep in touch with them after the show. first, let's go through some pre-challenge events. To start, I think Tess and Ali would have a little scene where Tess fully expresses her gratitude to Ali for her company. This scene would be reminiscent of the canonical episode 7 scene where Tess thanks Hunter and Ali for not giving up on her. Since Tess has now experienced the pain of losing Ali due to the previous challenge, I feel like Tess would want to get these feelings off her chest and fully open up to Ali, allowing them to get closer than anyone else has ever gotten. Ali would be extremely grateful for her friendship with Tess, and she would assure her that no matter what happens, the two of them will always be friends, both inside the game and outside the game. Next, I want to include a little scene between Rosa, Lake, and Riya, where all three of them would talk about the previous ceremony. Rosa would express her sadness that Maggie was gone, Lake would apologize to Riya for voting her out, saying that she couldn't vote Aiden out, and Riya would explain her rationale for voting out Maggie, noting that she felt a little bit like an outcast due to Lake, Rosa, and Maggie's existing friendship. After expressing these feelings, the three of them would agree to put all of this behind them and to move forward as a trio. Perhaps Rosa expresses in a confessional that even though she's not thrilled about Riya voting out Maggie, she also knows that she can't just turn against Riya right now, because that's not the example that she wants to set for her daughter, which is something that she's expressed in the canon season. Conversely, Riya would admit in a confessional that because Lake voted for her, she knows that she's at the bottom of this alliance, and that she needs to start exploring other options. This would lead into one final scene, where Carol would approach Aiden and assure him that everything between them is good. Carol did this in the canon timeline, and since Aiden believed it then, I'm inclined to believe that he would believe Carol now. And since Rosa and Maggie voted for Aiden at the last ceremony, Aiden now knows that he's not a top priority in his current alliance. Therefore, considering that Aiden's arc throughout the season has been him focusing on what he thinks he can do rather than on what others think of him, I think receiving votes at the previous ceremony would make Aiden want to start actively playing the game. Thus, Aiden would open up to Carol, telling her about his strong bonds with Lake, and to an extent, Riya, hoping that a 4-person majority alliance could form between them. This would get Carol to start thinking, and in a confessional, Carol would talk how if she takes out Aiden, it would be easier for her to take Riya under her wing. Now for part 1 of the challenge. This is pretty straightforward. Since Rosa is still here, she canonically won part 1 of this challenge, and there's no overwhelming evidence to suggest that Lake or Tess would win. I'm going to say that Rosa still wins part 1 of this challenge. This means that for part 2 of the challenge, Rosa gets to go by herself, and she probably still wins part 2 of the challenge. But before we move on, we need to look at the other 3 pairings for part 2 of the challenge. The first pairing would be Aiden and Lake. In their interactions, I think Lake would express concern over whether or not Riya is still upset that she voted for her. Aiden would assure Lake that she'll be okay, and that no matter what, Aiden will always be on Lake's side. This would bring them closer together, albeit to the level that Aiden and James were in the canonical episode 12, minus the romance, of course. Next, we have Tess and Ali. These interactions won't be too eventful, as the two of them would likely agree that they have to try and keep Carol, Riya, and Aiden on their side so that they can target Rosa and Lake. The final pairing is Carol and Riya. And their interactions would be quite similar to their canonical episode 9 interactions. Carol would spend this time throwing Aiden under the bus, while simultaneously emphasizing to Riya that they are the outsiders. While Riya would agree that she's felt alone since being here, she admits in a confessional that she's wary about betraying Aiden, since the two of them are on good terms and work together at the last ceremony. And the ending of part 2 of the challenge remains the same, with Rosa finishing first since she has no one to pull on her sled. This means that she gets to pick her partner for part 3 of the challenge. While she could pick Lake so that both of them could potentially win immunity, or she could pick Riya so she can assure her that Lake will not betray her, I ultimately decided that Rosa would pair up with Aiden, because she knows that with 7 campers remaining, she needs 4 votes to have a majority, and her best shot of securing that 4th vote is to win back Aiden's trust. And by pairing up with Aiden, Rosa can volunteer to be blindfolded, thereby putting her safety in Aiden's hands, showing Aiden that Rosa is willing to trust him. Does this work? Well, I think Aiden would appreciate the gesture and not view Rosa as a bad person, but he'll never forget that he's at the bottom of his previous majority alliance. As for the other pairings, Tess and Ali stay together, and I'll assume that they're using Tess's sled, since Ali's sled is just a snowboard. And between the two of them, I'll assume that Tess is blindfolded because we established at the beginning of the episode that Tess wholeheartedly trusts Ali, so Tess putting her safety in Ali's hands stays true to the mindset that we established for her. Next, Carol and Riya are staying together, and I'll assume they use Carol's sled since it seems more heavy-duty, and I'll assume that Riya is blindfolded because Carol would want to be in control. This leaves Lake to pair up with Oliver, and I'll assume that Oliver is blindfolded so Lake remains in control, which also aligns with her character arc. And I'll assume that they'll use Lake's sled for part 3, since Oliver didn't build a sled of his own. But after all this, who wins immunity? Well, I doubt that Aiden and Rosa will. Assuming that they still use Rosa's sled, I think Rosa's sled will still fall apart like in canon, taking Aiden and Rosa out of the race. Similarly, I don't think that Ali and Tess will win either. Since Ali canonically got Hunter to drive into a tree branch, I think it's safe to assume that Ali does the same here, meaning that Ali goes flying, and without anyone to guide her, Tess crashes shortly after. This leaves a battle between Carol and Riya, as well as Lake and Oliver. Ultimately, since Lake canonically wasn't in this episode, we don't have any definitive measure of whether or not she can build a great sled or be good at sledding in general. And when you combine this with the fact that Carol canonically traveled very fast on her sled, and also isn't afraid to ram others off their sled, I think it's most likely that Carol and Riya either travel fast enough to cross the finish line first, or she manages to ram Lake and Oliver off their sled, allowing Carol and Riya to win immunity. With that settled, who gets voted out? Fair warning, this is going to be really complicated, so bear with me. I'm going to start with Aiden's intentions. In this episode, we've set Aiden up to attempt a big move that he can call his own. So, what I'm thinking is that he rallies together Lake, Riya, and Carol, and he attempts to convince them to vote for Rosa. This is a big risk, since Rosa has an immunity totem and both Lake and Riya are close with Rosa. But since Rosa voted for Aiden at the last ceremony, Aiden would feel more comfortable taking out Rosa while he has the chance to do it, noting that they all have to convince Rosa that she's safe so that she doesn't use her totem to save herself. Thus, Aiden will vote for Rosa, and I don't see him changing his mind. However, none of his three conspirators would be on board for this. Specifically, Lake and Riya would be hesitant to take out Rosa, since they are both close to her. I could see Lake and Riya attempting to talk Aiden out of it and instead keep their original alliance together to vote for Ali or Tess, but with Aiden's arc leading him to do what's best for his own game, I doubt he would listen. Additionally, now that Aiden revealed to Lake that he knows about Rosa's immunity totem, Lake would start wondering how Aiden found out about it. And since Aiden trusts Lake so much by this point, I think he would just straight up tell Lake that Riya told him about it. Yes, it's not the smartest decision, but Aiden's not the strongest strategist out there, so I don't think it's that unrealistic. This reveal would not only make Lake question Riya's loyalty, but it would also make Riya more upset with Aiden. Although Riya could lie her way out of it by claiming that she told Aiden because she didn't want him to feel left out, I don't think it would fix the distrust between Lake and Riya. But regardless, I could see Lake and Riya going to Rosa, where Lake warns Rosa that Aiden is trying to target her, and that he could possibly get a majority if he, Ali, Tess, and Carol band together. This would make Rosa panic, and I think regardless of where the votes go, Rosa would feel unsafe enough to play her totem on herself. That being said, I don't think Rosa would target Aiden because of this, since she does have some degree of loyalty to him, and I think Lake would still trust Aiden enough to not agree to a plan to vote him out. So, I think Rosa and Lake would stay loyal to their alliance and target Tess. Canonically, they chose to eliminate Tess over Ali in episode 7, so I think it makes sense for them to make the same choice here given that they're the only two campers who are both not immune and not their allies. They would probably expect Riya to vote with them, hoping that with Aiden's vote against Rosa being nullified, 3 votes may be enough to get Tess out. However, Riya is left undecided at this point, and I'll come back to this later. Meanwhile, I think Carol would believe that this is the time for her to take the shot at Aiden, since she openly talked about doing this in canon at this point in time. To get the majority, I think Carol would try to reel in Riya, Tess, and Ali, since the 4 of them voted together at the last ceremony. However, going back to what I said about Riya, I think she has her own plans. From Riya's perspective, she actually has good connections with almost everyone left in the game. The only person who Riya is on super shaky terms with is Lake, since Lake voted for her at the last ceremony, and in this timeline, Lake's trust in Riya is even further shaken after Aiden revealed that Riya told him about Rosa's totem. So from Riya's perspective, getting rid of Lake would be the best option for Riya, as it eliminates the only person who might want to vote her out at this point. And if Riya votes for Lake, this leaves Tess and Ali as the swing votes. I don't see any reason for them to vote for Rosa, since they weren't approached by Aiden to do so, and they shouldn't vote for Tess, because Tess can't vote for herself and Ali would never vote for Tess. So, the question is as follows. Do they side with Carol and vote for Aiden? Or do they side with Riya and vote for Lake? Ultimately, since Tess and Ali haven't had any serious conversations with Aiden or Lake, I think the decision comes down to who Tess and Ali trust more between Riya and Carol. And between the two of them, I think they trust Riya more. Yes, I know that Carol gave Tess and Ali immunity in the last episode in this timeline. But canonically, Ali expressed confusion as to why Carol did this considering that she never talked to her, so my view on this is that Ali wasn't chomping at the bit to work with Carol despite the fact that she did this. In contrast, we've seen 2 instances where Ali has actively sought out Riya in order to work with her. And considering that Hunter is gone in this timeline, I think it's safe to assume that Ali will be the one carrying the strategic weight for her alliance. Thus, I think it's likely that Ali would naturally want to side with Riya, and with Tess following Ali's lead, I think they cast the deciding votes against Lake. And despite Rosa using her totem on herself due to Aiden's defection, it's all a waste as Lake is voted out by a 3-2 to 1-1 plurality. But before we move on, I want to talk about the immediate fallout to the elimination, as this is important. In the fallout, Lake would be shocked that she was voted out, and quickly rationalized that due to her closeness to Rosa and Aiden, the 3 votes cast against her must have been Tess, Ali, and either Riya or Carol. While Aiden might suspect that Rosa voted for him again, Rosa and Lake would quickly debunk this, explaining that they voted for Tess, forcing Aiden to recognize that either Riya or Carol voted for him. I think both Riya and Carol might try and claim that the other person voted for Aiden, but I think Riya would ultimately have a more believable story, since she could just easily claim that she voted for Lake as payback for Lake voting for her in episode 8, which Aiden should believe, I suppose. But regardless, Lake would leave in disappointment, wondering how she let the game slip out of her fingers. But that's not where the episode ends. The reason why I wanted to talk about the immediate fallout from Lake's elimination is because it affects what's about to happen next, which is Crystal announcing that they will immediately vote out another camper, as canonically, we need to get down to 5 campers for episode 10, necessitating this double elimination. And since this was technically done in canon episode 9 with Carol and Ali's eliminations, I think it makes sense to do the same here. But how do the votes fall? Well, this isn't easy to follow, so I'll do my best to explain. Let's start with Carol. Now that Aiden is aware that it's at least possible, if not likely that Carol voted for him, Carol would probably feel like she's past the point of no return, and that she needs to keep her foot on the gas and vote for Aiden, hoping that Tess, Ali, and Riya will join her in doing so. Next, let's look at the trio of Riya, Tess, and Ali. Since Riya can't realistically split up Ali and Tess due to the other campers seemingly targeting each other, Riya would feel like her only real option for this vote is to stick with Ali and Tess. With this in mind, because Carol is voting for Aiden, and because Aiden can't vote for himself, there's no way that Rosa, Carol, and Aiden will be able to force a tie against the trio of Riya, Tess, and Ali. Thus, the trio of Riya, Tess, and Ali will ultimately decide who gets voted out. So that leaves one question. Do they vote for Rosa, or do they vote for Aiden? Well, Ali and Tess don't have any serious connection with either of them, and neither of them have shown themselves to be an overwhelming force in challenges, so I don't think Tess and Ali necessarily have a strong preference over who they vote for. So, I could see them letting Riya make the decision with the hope that this will solidify Riya's loyalty to them, and that it will ensure that they have the majority at the final 5 to avoid being split up. So, it comes down to Riya, and she's in a really awkward position where she has a reason to trust both Rosa and Aiden, but there's also a lingering thought that stops Riya from trusting them completely. And there's a decent argument for her to vote both of them out. For Rosa, Riya might think that because she's voted out Rosa's 2 closest allies, Rosa would never trust Riya ever again, so it might be the point of no return with regards to Rosa. Conversely, because Riya knows that Carol wants Aiden out, Riya might think that if she gets Aiden out, it will be easier for her to convince Carol to help her split up Tess and Ali next time. To be honest, I think both reasons are sound. But ultimately, because this decision could go either way, I'm going to go with the option that I think makes the better story. And to me, that decision is to have Riya rally Tess and Ali into voting for Rosa, with the hope that it would give Riya enough time to potentially resolve the disagreement between Carol and Aiden, and then rally them against Tess and Ali later on. There are 3 reasons why I think it would be better for the overall story. Firstly, I feel like having Rosa getting eliminated this way would end her story in a way that's consistent with her character. Throughout this whole season, Rosa's character has been someone who is loyal above all, and Rosa would not want to do something to set a bad example for her daughter. So by having Rosa getting voted out by Riya after losing her 2 closest allies, but with Rosa still not choosing to vote for Riya, this would show Rosa the dangers of being loyal to the wrong people, and she can then teach her daughter the lesson that not everyone in the world is as good-hearted as them, and that she shouldn't let people take advantage of her kindness. Secondly, several of my past videos have had Carol's grudge against Aiden be resolved by Carol just simply voting him out, so I feel like it would be more interesting to see what could happen if they're given time to actually talk about their feud. And thirdly, had I eliminated Aiden here and kept Rosa, then the season probably ends with a finale of Rosa, Carol, and Riya, or possibly Carol, Riya, and Ali. And these finales have already been documented on my channel, so I want to see if we can get a different finalist combination. Thus, Rosa gets the plurality of the votes, and just for the sake of completion, let's say that Rosa profusely pleads with Aiden to join her in voting for Tess, expressing that she genuinely feels bad for voting for him back in episode 8. And Aiden, seeing that Rosa was just as strict as he was by Lake's blind side, would join her. Thus, Rosa is voted out by a 3-2 to 1 vote, and Rosa leaves with regret as she realizes that her loyalty was taken advantage of, but also knowing that she stuck to her morals and didn't betray her allies. For the pre-challenge events, I want to focus on 2 specific ones. The first event is between Riya, Carol, and Aiden. In this scene, Riya would start off by trying to get Aiden to apologize for telling lies about Carol earlier on in the season. Keep in mind that Carol lied to Riya by saying that Aiden and James told lies about her to the other members of the Orange team. So by this point, Riya is under the assumption that Carol is purely a victim in this scenario. However, this is when Aiden, who is currently still rattled by Lake's elimination, blows up at Carol, insisting that James was the one who threw Carol under the bus, and that he only told James about the plan so that he would help the two of them tie the vote against the friendship trio. Carol originally wouldn't believe this, noting that it would be stupid for James to throw her under the bus if Aiden's plan was to tie the vote. Aiden would actually agree with this, but emphasized the fact that James was an absolute idiot and that he still doesn't understand what James was thinking. Additionally, Aiden would point out that this was the reason why he voted for James at that episode's ceremony, and it played a role in why Aiden cast the deciding vote against James in episode 4. And to end the conversation, Aiden would apologize for the fact that Carol was eliminated early, insisting that he wanted her to stay, but also noting that she shouldn't blame him for it because it's not his fault that James decided to be an idiot, before storming off. This final plea helps Aiden remain in line with his story arc, since by letting Carol know that her perception of him is wrong, he's pushing back against other people's opinions of him, which is what he's had to do with James, the producers, and other obstacles in his life. Additionally, I'll even include a confessional where Aiden expresses frustration with how the last episode played out, noting that he tried to make a move that he thought was best for his own game, and yet he only exposed how little control he had in the game, leaving him disappointed in his own self. Thus, Aiden would storm out of the cabin, leaving Carol and Riya to talk about what just happened. Riya would ask Carol about whether or not Aiden was being truthful. Carol would admit that she's not sure, but that she's not surprised that it ended up this way, granted that this is how it's always ended up for her in the past. This is when Carol would talk to Riya about how she's spent a lot of her life being confrontational, and that it's led to her pushing others away, which at least echoes what she said back in episode 2. Riya would ask Carol why she does this, and she says it's because she knows the world is full of people who only care about their own self-interests, and that if she doesn't keep her guard up, she'll end up being taken advantage of, echoing what happened to Rosa in the previous episode. Perhaps it's revealed that Carol comes from the cutthroat world of business where people are consistently selfish. This is when Riya would tell Carol that even though the world is full of selfish people, that doesn't mean that she should brush off everyone as being selfish, and that there's a middle ground between being standoffish and being a pushover. Perhaps Riya could compare this to her career as an actress, where she's met a lot of people who will do anything to get to the top, but that she's also met people who are genuinely nice. Riya would cap off the conversation by saying that Carol should give Aiden a chance, because based on what he just said, it doesn't seem like he wanted Carol to get voted out. The purpose of this conversation is twofold. 1. It allows us to explore Carol's character in a bit more depth. It's easy to write her off as a stereotypical Karen. But beyond that, there's room for us to look deeper and explore why Carol behaves in the way that she does. And independent of this video, if Carol does return for another season, I hope we get to see Carol's backstory explored some more. And secondly, this conversation allows Aiden and Carol to at least voice their perspectives on their whole conflict. In canon, and in past videos, their conflict was sort of just left at Aiden believing Carol's lies, and Carol trying to take a shot at Aiden out of revenge. But in reality, I honestly think that their conflict had potential to be resolved with some communication. And to quote a very, very wise woman,
honestly, a 5-minute conversation could probably solve his issue.
Anyways, now we move on to the second pre-challenge event. And this is between Ali and Tess, where they agree that they need to take advantage of the conflict between Aiden and Carol in order to keep themselves safe. Thus, when Aiden walks by after storming away from his conversation with Carol, Ali and Tess will approach Aiden and ask if he'd be willing to vote for Carol at the next ceremony. He would eagerly agree, seeing it as an opportunity to take his fate back into his own hands. And with that, we get to the challenge. Based on how the pre-challenge interactions happened, I'm assuming that the divisions are Aiden, Tess, and Ali versus Riya and Carol. That being said, with Riya still in Carol's ear and encouraging her to patch things up with Aiden, I think Carol directs her focus towards taking out Tess and Ali. And I don't think this is out of character, considering that Carol was never really close with Tess and Ali, and the two of them didn't vote with Carol at the last ceremony, so I could see Carol not feeling bad about trying to take them out. As for Riya, I actually lean towards her being too indecisive to shoot anyone, considering that she has some sort of bond with everyone remaining. On the flip side, with Tess and Ali feeling comfortable siding with Aiden for the time being, they probably wouldn't be too against taking out Riya after they deal with Carol. And with Aiden on Tess and Ali's side, I think it's very likely that Carol and Riya get taken out by the other three, since neither Carol nor Riya have shown themselves to be a fantastic shooter, or at least not on the level that Hunter was in canon. This leaves Aiden, Tess, and Ali as the final three in the challenge. And while I could imagine Tess and Ali letting Aiden win so that he stays on their side, I also think that it's possible that Ali's competitiveness from being a gamer would instinctively cause her to shoot Aiden when he has his guard down after taking out Riya and Carol. Plus, this adds a bit more suspense to the upcoming ceremony with Ali shooting the swing vote. This leaves Tess and Ali as the last two remaining, and because I just can't imagine Tess shooting Ali after all they've been through, I think Tess lets Ali shoot her last balloon, meaning that Ali wins immunity. So how do the votes fall? Well, Ali and Tess unsurprisingly vote for Carol, as they planned from the start. Meanwhile, Carol and Riya vote for Tess, since Ali is immune. This leaves Aiden as the swing vote, and everyone knows it. Tess and Ali's speech is quite simple, with them noting that they can help Aiden take out the person who's targeting him. Riya and Carol's speech would take more time, with Riya attempting to point out that neither her nor Carol targeted Aiden during the challenge, and that now that Aiden told his side of the story, Carol sees that both her and Aiden were screwed over by James, and that Aiden wasn't deliberately trying to get Carol voted out. After Carol confirms this to be true, Aiden would calm down a bit, knowing that the truth was at least known, but he would still criticize both Riya and Carol for voting against his interests, with Riya voting for Lake and Carol voting for him at the past two ceremonies. While this is true, and Riya and Carol would apologize for it, Riya would point out that Tess and Ali aren't thinking about his best interests either, and that if Carol goes home and Riya wins the next immunity challenge, then Ali and Tess will definitely target Aiden over each other. This leaves Aiden in a very uncertain position, debating on whether or not he actually believes that Riya and Carol are remorseful for going against him, and whether or not it's worth putting his trust in people who didn't give him the chance to tell his side of the story. In the end, I feel like the damage has been done, and while it may not be the best strategic move, Aiden would vote with Ali and Tess to take out Carol. Aiden would clarify afterwards that after he tried to make a big move during the last episode that ended up failing, he just didn't want to risk being betrayed again, and that he'd rather be stabbed in the front by Tess and Ali than be stabbed in the back by Carol. However, Aiden would tell Carol that he genuinely believes that she regrets how she handled their conflict, and that with a bit of time, they can rebuild their friendship again. And while Carol would be a bit defeated, she would accept it, agreeing to be friends with Aiden again one day. And thus, Carol's story ends with her aggression causing her elimination, but having learned that while keeping your guard up the whole time might protect you from being hurt, it doesn't give much room to experience the joy of being around people who are genuinely good, allowing Carol to experience a bit of growth during her short time in the game. To kick off the episode, we'll have an interaction between Riya and Aiden. Riya would be sad that Carol is gone, causing her to feel alone once again. Aiden would try to console Riya about this, but he would also stand by his decision to vote out Carol, claiming that he just couldn't trust her. Surprisingly, Riya wouldn't blame Aiden for voting out Carol due to a lack of trust. After all, Riya voted out Lake and Rosa due to a lack of trust, so Riya has done the exact same things that Aiden has done. That being said, Riya would express that despite what's happened between them over the last couple of episodes, she still wants to work with Aiden. However, Aiden would admit that he's not sure if he can still trust her, and that he just needs time to think. And briefly, we'll look at Tess and Ali. Not much changes here. The two of them are still loyal to each other, and they probably talk about who they would want to side with between Aiden and Riya. They would probably lean towards siding with Aiden, while also noting that Riya was cordial with them at some point during the season, despite the fact that she voted against them at the last ceremony. Either way, they agree that they need one of them to win immunity. Now we get to the challenge. Part 1 requires the campers to run to the cliffs and jump off of one of them. Now, I don't think the running part matters, since it's important to note that we have two campers that are terrified of heights. Ali showed in Season 3 that she's nervous when she had to jump off a cliff, and Aiden showed in the canon episode 11 of this season that heights terrify him. Because of this, and since I expect Tess to stop and comfort Ali, I think Riya seizes the opportunity to jump off the top cliff, earning her the biggest advantage in Part 2. While this happens, Aiden is alone and freaking out over the thought of jumping off a cliff. And after seeing Tess stopping to comfort Ali, this makes Aiden fully realize that Tess and Ali would always choose each other over him, and that he shouldn't be complacent in letting them stab him in the front if Riya ends up winning immunity. So with enough willpower, he manages to jump off of the first cliff, fueled by a desire to forge his own fate. Meanwhile, Tess's comforting allows Ali to jump off the second cliff, and then Tess jumps off the third cliff, ending this part of the challenge. Moving on to Part 2, and based on the placements in Part 1, this means that Riya gets to shoot watermelons, Tess gets to shoot pineapples, and Aiden gets to shoot lemons. And as I've established in previous What If videos, Ali's third place finish in the Part 1 means that she gets to have grapefruits as ammunition. So who wins this challenge? Well, it's not Riya, since she canonically showed that she couldn't win even with the biggest ammunition, so she shouldn't win in this timeline given that she has the same ammunition. Next, I don't think that Tess wins, since we haven't seen evidence of Tess being accurate in shooting, so I don't think she wins either. This leaves Aiden and Ali as the last two. And since we know that Aiden canonically won this challenge with the smallest ammunition, which is the same one that he has in this timeline, the question is whether or not Ali is accurate enough to knock Nina off the gate faster than Aiden. And although I've speculated a lot in past videos about Ali's accuracy, there's no concrete evidence to suggest that Ali is accurate with a slingshot, so I feel much more comfortable saying that immunity goes to the canonical winner of this challenge, Aiden. So how do the votes fall? Well, with Aiden immune, Tess and Ali easily vote for Riya, since they're definitely not voting for each other. Meanwhile, Riya votes for Tess, since that's how she voted last time. This leaves Aiden as the swing vote once again. Tess and Ali's speech is that they didn't vote him out when Carol wanted him out at the final 7 and final 6, which is a decent pitch. As for Ria's speech, she would try to point out that she's helped Aiden out in the past, specifically by warning him about Rosa's totem and the fact that Rosa didn't tell him about it. Aiden would rightfully point out that Riya took out Lake, who by that point was Aiden's closest ally. Riya would flip this into noting that when Carol tried to get Ali and Tess into voting for Aiden at the final 7 and final 6, Riya talked Ali and Tess into voting for Lake instead, and then talked them into voting for Rosa right after. This is important, as not only does this show Aiden that Riya had his back, but it also dissects Tess and Ali's speech, as it shows that Tess and Ali's decision to save Aiden was actually made by Riya, putting a different spin on what Aiden originally thought. In the end, Aiden has to make a decision, and although I could see him going either way, I think the way that makes slightly more sense and is better for the story is for Aiden to side with Riya and vote for Tess, forcing a tie between Tess and Riya. This means that Tess and Riya have to face off in a tiebreaker, and based on what I've established in previous What If videos, even though we don't know what the tiebreaker challenge would be, because Riya has at least shown in previous challenges that she's capable of showing up and doing decently well when it matters, I'll say that Riya wins the tiebreaker, thereby eliminating Tess in the process. Ali is sad to see Tess go, but Tess leaves in stride, ending her story by knowing that she's leaving the game with a true friend in Ali, which is more than she could have ever wanted. Before we get into the final challenge, let's look at who each eliminated camper supports. The bulk of the support goes to Aiden, who is supported by Lake, Rosa, Maggie, Kai, and James. Lake was really close with Aiden up to her elimination, so she's a no-brainer. As for Rosa, she managed to patch things up a little bit with Aiden in the short lead up to her elimination, so I think she would support him, especially after Riya betrayed her. As for Maggie, even though Aiden betrayed Maggie, since Lake and Rosa both support Aiden, I think it's more likely that Maggie supports Aiden too. And since Kai and Maggie are close, Kai probably supports Aiden as well. And for James, even though Aiden completely shut him down in episode 4, I feel like Aiden's words to him in that episode would make James at least feel a bit of remorse for how he treated Aiden, and thus, he would want to support him in hopes of making it up to him. Moving on, I think Ali gets 3 supporters, specifically Tess, Hunter, and Yul. Tess is obvious, since the two of them became basically best friends throughout the season in this timeline. As for Hunter, he and Ali had some romantic interactions in this season prior to Hunter leaving the team, so I still think that Hunter would support Ali. As for Yul, even though he doesn't exactly hate any of the final 3, since Ali was one of his allies and she didn't vote him out, I think he would support Ali. This leaves Riya with 2 supporters, which are Connor and Carol. Connor is obvious since the two of them were really close prior to Connor's elimination, and Carol was close with Riya in episodes 9 and 10 in this timeline, so I don't think it's a stretch to put Carol as Riya's supporter. The question is, who will be each finalist's helper? Well, I think Aiden picks Lake, since she was Aiden's closest friend for a long time in this season. As for Ali, I'm going to say that she picks Tess. Even though Hunter may be physically stronger than Tess, Hunter's early elimination in this timeline allowed Ali and Tess to become so close that I'm willing to say that Ali would trust Tess more in this situation. And for Riya, I think she picks Connor, since that's what she did in canon, and I don't think anything significant has happened that would cause that to change. And with that, we have our 3 helpers. Let's move on to the first section of the final challenge, where the finalists are skiing and have to collect items, while being pulled on a snowmobile. Luckily, since the pairings of Aiden and Lake as well as Riya and Connor were in the canon finale, it's easy to figure out how well they do in the challenge. Canonically, Aiden and Lake completed this section in first, with Riya and Connor in second, so it's reasonable to assume that Aiden and Lake finish ahead of Riya and Connor. As for Tess and Ali, since there's no proof that Ali is good at skiing or that Tess can drive a snowmobile, we have to assume that they're just average. And since Lake and Connor seem to be driving pretty fast, I think it's safe to say that Ali and Tess finished the section in third place, behind Riya and Connor in second, and behind Aiden and Lake in first. And honestly, I think the driving portion ends with the same placements. Canonically, Aiden and Lake finished ahead of Riya and Connor, even with Riya being aggressive due to her villainy. So with Riya not being as aggressive due to her lack of villainy, Aiden definitely finishes this section in first. As for Riya, even though she's not as aggressive in this timeline, I think she's at least able to maintain a good amount of the pace that she had in canon, so I'm comfortable keeping her in second place. That being said, assuming that Ali is the one driving her car due to her generally more active demeanor compared to Tess, I can actually imagine a scenario where Ali treats this part of the challenge like a racing video game, and that it actually allows her to catch up to Riya. Don't get me wrong, I can definitely imagine a world where Ali just drives like normal and she stays in third place. But for the sake of giving Ali a bit of credit and also being conservative in how much credit I give the canon results, I'll let Ali and Tess catch up to Riya and Connor, leaving the 2 pairs in second place behind Aiden and Lake. Now we get to the rock climbing section. Canonically, Aiden and Lake started and finished this section in first place, and I see no reason why this would change. Especially since in canon, Aiden paused to talk with Lake about James. But since Aiden dealt with him back in episode 4, there's no reason for Aiden to pause and talk about him, meaning that Aiden should be able to finish this section faster than in canon. Similarly, Riya canonically paused to argue with Connor over her villainy, but since Riya isn't as villainous in this timeline, there's no reason for Riya to stop and talk to Connor, so she should also finish the challenge faster than in canon. And for Ali and Tess, unfortunately, I think they fall behind here. While Ali eventually showed in Season 3 that she can rock climb pretty well, part of this challenge also involves the strength of your helpers. And canonically, Tess isn't the strongest camper out there. Recalling, Tess struggled in Season 3 with pushing over a yarn ball, while Gret and Ashley were able to do so. Granted, Gret and Ashley are probably two of the stronger campers that we've seen, but I think this shows us that Tess does not have the above-average level of strength needed to clearly provide Ali with the support that she needs. Thus, I think Ali and Tess drop back into third place, behind Riya and Connor in second, as well as Aiden and Lake in first. And now we get to the cliff jump section. Luckily, we get a cop-out since both Aiden and Ali are terrified of jumping off cliffs. Based on this, I think it's safe to say that Riya is guaranteed a spot in the final two. But who joins her? Honestly, I'm not going to overthink this one. Since both Aiden and Ali are both scared of jumping off cliffs, and both would probably need support and time in order to psych themselves into jumping, I'm going to give the edge to the person that has more time to psych themselves into jumping. And since Aiden gets to the cliff top with the lead, I'll assume that he has more time to prepare himself for jumping. Additionally, since Riya is also there with him, and since Riya isn't nearly as villainous as she was in canon, not only does she not back him off the cliff, but I could imagine a scenario where Riya actually stops to comfort Aiden and assure him that she has his back. This would sort of connect back to the previous episode, where Aiden had to psych himself into jumping off the lowest cliff without any support. And now that he actually has support from someone like Riya, it's made him realize how genuine his friendship with Riya is, and that he should be glad that his decision to force a tie in the previous episode was not in vain. Thus, after a small pep talk, Riya and Aiden glide down to the docks and get into their boats, eliminating Ali in third place. It's not the most ceremonious place for Ali, but she at least caps off her story by taking the strategic lead after Hunter's elimination. She made a close friend in Tess, and she could end up with a new beau if her and Hunter reconnect during the off-season. Not the worst ending in the world. But now we have the final two, heading into the boat driving section. Canonically, Riya drove her boat pretty fast, and Lake has shown herself to be a good boat driver. So, I feel like they would keep pace with each other throughout this section. That being said, the cave diving section is extremely interesting. Canonically, Riya was terrified with the idea of going into a dark cave. She would have been stuck in there if not for Rosa bailing her out. Meanwhile, Aiden showed in episode 3 of season 3 that he's also not thrilled about cave diving, but he did seem slightly more willing to do it compared to Riya. This is purely based on the fact that when Tom suggested going into the cave, Aiden said, "Fine," followed by his concern. While the word "fine" is not always a sign of approval, my interpretation given the context of this scene is that Aiden may not have been thrilled to enter the cave, but that he was willing to do it given the stakes of the challenge. So, I think Aiden might be slightly more willing to cave dive in this scenario. Additionally, since Aiden literally just broke through one of his fears by jumping off a really high cliff, he might be on enough of an adrenaline high that he might not be as affected by his hesitations in this section. Either way, I think Aiden will at least be able to get a lead during this section. That being said, I'm going to make a major creative choice here, for the sake of story writing. By this point, Riya is freaking out in the cave, and Connor is probably doing his best to calm her down. Because Riya is pausing, and because Aiden has a decent lead, he could reasonably head back to the surface and extend his lead. However, I'm actually going to say that Aiden pauses as well. And the reason he pauses is because Aiden is left with a major decision. All logic says that Aiden should just swim back to the surface and extend his lead, thereby giving him a better chance of winning the season. And I think most people would use that logic. However, based on how Aiden is written in this timeline, he knows that Riya has done all she could to try and support Aiden and keep him safe for the second half of the season. Even when she voted out Lake, Aiden's closest ally, Riya still had to persuade Tess and Ali to follow her instead of Carol, thereby taking the votes off of Aiden and onto Lake. Therefore, Aiden would have to consider if he can live with the idea of leaving Riya at a time when she needs him more than ever, especially after all she's done for him. This decision is further compounded by the fact that the last time that Aiden made a decision to not go with the flow and instead do his own thing, aka when he tried to rally Lake, Riya, and Carol against Rosa back in episode 9, it blew up in his face. In the end, despite all logic telling Aiden to leave, I'm going to have Aiden go back and help Riya through the cave diving section. This would show that not only is Aiden reciprocating the support that Riya gave him all this time, he's also showing the world that if he's going to win, it's going to be by how he wants plays the game, not by how society says he should play the game, solidifying that he is doing what he wants, regardless of what others think. Thus, Aiden and Riya swim back to the surface together, and they head back to the beach on their boats. Thus, we get into the final section of the challenge, with Riya and Aiden riding motorcycles through some obstacles. As for Riya, she canonically did well with riding a motorcycle, so she should do fine here. As for Aiden, the closest that we have to him driving a motorcycle is him riding a motorcycle with Lake in episode 11 of season 3, and in that episode, he seemed pretty comfortable, and based on what he said, it seems like he was willing to go faster. So, I'm comfortable in saying that he would keep up with Riya in this section. Therefore, I think it comes down to the campers who are controlling the golf ball guns. And based on who is left in each person's support group, I think Carol steps up to support Riya due to their existing loyalty, and James steps up to support Aiden, and this is mainly because I can't imagine Maggie, Kai, or Rosa wanting to shoot a gun, even though Maggie and Rosa were betrayed by Riya. So, James is the only option. And sure, you could consider the possibility of Hunter, Ali, Tess, or Yul taking that role now that Ali is out of the game. But I'm not fully convinced that any of them support Aiden, so I'll just leave it at James. Between Carol and James, I think it's clear based on canon information that Carol is a better shot than James is, so I think Carol manages to knock Aiden off his bike at least once. But does this mean that Riya wins? Well, not necessarily. There's one more factor to consider. Thanks to Connor and Hunter, we know that the eliminated campers are able to watch all the episodes after their elimination. Therefore, all the eliminated campers should be able to find out that hitting the gun will cause the golf balls to fire rapidly. Due to this, we must ask whether or not James will hit the gun as a last-ditch effort to hit Riya and give Aiden a chance at victory. Ultimately, I think that comes down to how we want to write James in this timeline. Obviously, things didn't end well between James and Aiden in this timeline, and I said earlier in this video that James was eliminated while wondering where he went wrong. Well, 8-ish episodes is a pretty decent amount of time for James to watch the show and reflect on where he went wrong. And especially considering Aiden's blow up against Carol in this timeline's episode 10, I think with the way things have been written, James will realize how he messed up Aiden's game, and I think James would feel remorseful enough to want to make up for that. Thus, I think James would hit the gun, thereby sending dozens of golf balls flying at Riya, and knocking her off her bike. And this setback gives Aiden the time he needs to make up the difference and cross the finish line, thereby making him the winner of Season 2 of Disventure Camp. So we have our answer. If Riya swaps Hunter to the orange team in episode 4 of Season 2, James and Hunter are eliminated sequentially, Riya flips to take out Maggie, Lake, and Rosa one after another, Tess and Ali form the strongest friendship ever before getting 4th and 3rd place, and Aiden goes on to win the season. I'll be candid with all of you. I don't blame you if you find this video boring. I get that the friendship finales aren't exactly the most exciting form of television to watch. And I completely get it if watching an hour's worth of footage only to end with a friendship finale isn't the payoff that you wanted. That being said, I tried to approach this what-if video with more of a story writing touch compared to my previous videos in this series. And a part of me likes the idea of Aiden and Riya ending the season as friends, as it's a good change of pace from reality. And generally, I feel like I ended some storylines decently well compared to the canon season, and possibly even better. I mean, Lake, Maggie, and Tess still end their stories pretty similarly to what they got in canon. And as for the rest, Ali's story about taking control of her own game was fulfilled thanks to Hunter's early elimination. We got to explore a bit of growth with Carol with her realizing that she doesn't always need to keep her guard up all the time. Riya ends up making a name for herself by controlling the game past Connor's elimination, and Aiden ends up getting rewarded for making his own decisions, sending a message to the audience that sometimes it's worth doubling down on your beliefs if you truly believe that it will improve your life, rather than just passively accepting society's rules for how you should live your life. Sure, we may not end up with James and Aiden getting together, but that's not the end of the world. Perhaps we could have a little scene at the end where Rosa tells Aiden that James's efforts to hit the gun is what gave Aiden enough time to cross the finish line, prompting Aiden to thank James for his help. Here, we could have a genuine conversation where James apologizes for nearly screwing up Aiden's game, and for not realizing how much Aiden was hurt by the idea of having to listen to people around him tell him what to do all the time. James would also note that while he knows that helping Aiden win doesn't repair all the damage that's been done, James hopes that they could be friends one day. In response, Aiden would thank James for apologizing, and for a little fun, I'm going to have Aiden paraphrase a quote from one of my favorite shows, just because I think it's fitting. James, I can say we're friends. But it's a start. What I like about this is that it doesn't rush the reconciliation process between them, but it opens the door for growth and development. And who knows, maybe in this universe, the two of them get cast for season 3 and they end up falling in love still. Anything is possible with a little imagination. And that about does it for this video. What do you think of my theory? Do you agree with my thought process? Do you disagree? Did I miss something big that would impact the entire video? Either way, please let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you like the video, click subscribe if you really like the video, and for some ending words of wisdom. If you're going to climb a tree, make sure you climb it at the right time. Because the last thing that you want to do is to climb a tree looking for an idol, only to find out that you're about one season too early. Thank you, and farewell.